Okay, so with the previous videos, I wanted to start with what I thought might have gone wrong, and then start making adjustments to the presentation, to the sequence, and so forth, to try to improve it. But the other thing on my mind was, if I were diving in the middle of a lesson and thought I had to teach what a quadratic equation was, maybe one of those is the way I would do it. But if I was thinking from scratch, from first principles, how would I teach kids about quadratic equations, to identify quadratic equations? I feel like I'd do it really quite differently. So I wanted to try to piece all of that together in the next set of videos, just to share some of the thinking there. So to kick off, when it comes to the use of language in the classroom, I have three principles: simplicity, economy, and precision. And the point about precision, ideally, if I'm writing something like this, ideally I would not say x to the power of 7. And that is because 7 is not the power. This is the power. That is the 7th power of x. So down here, for example, these are the multiples of 6. These are the powers of 6. And so we've got the first power of 6, the second power, the third power, the fourth power. So this whole number is the fourth power of 6. It can be represented like this. This is also the fourth power of 6. So this little 4, that is not a power. That is either an index or an exponent. Colloquially, 6 to the power of 4 is understood. Actually, I think 6 to the power of 4 on reflection. I'd have to double check this. That might be correct. It's just not correct, because this whole thing is a power. It's just not correct that the 4 is the power. The whole thing is the power. It's the fourth power. Not important here, but it does become important, for example, if you're trying to teach logarithms, I found. So I'm going to be sticking to index and exponent to describe the little numbers. I'm going to try to anyway, try to have that discipline because it is more precise. Okay, with that said, the next thing on my mind, I actually want to deal with quadratic expressions before looking at quadratic equations. Because if I can do that, there's two reasons why I want to do it. One is it will be simpler. So if I've got an expression like that one, that's just a bit simpler than an equation or anything I might have on the right hand side of that. And then if they can recognize a quadratic expression, I could then treat the equation as a correlated feature sequence where I say, is this a quadratic equation? Yes. How do I know? Because the expression is quadratic. So I can correlate the quadratic equation with the quadratic expression, assuming it's been fully simplified like that, or made equal to 0. The next thing I want to dig into is that quadratics, I'm aware, they're a special case in a broader set of polynomials. So I actually want to communicate polynomial first and foremost. And I partly want to do this because the conditions for being a polynomial, they're really quite simple. It sounds like a big complicated word, but it's actually quite straightforward to identify polynomials. And then the special cases where they have names, linear, quadratic, cubic, etc., they're also very simple. And there aren't that many special cases either, so there are not a lot to learn. So polynomial, linear, quadratic, cubic, quartic. You can keep going. You can have quintic, sextic, septic, octic, nonic, decic. I think there's undecic beyond that. But usually beyond degree 7, mathematicians don't use the names. They'll just say polynomial of degree whatever. And in terms of school, certainly before A-level, we rarely see anything beyond a cubic. So there's a decision to be made about how many names to introduce. I'd probably aim to keep it at just 3: linear, quadratic, and cubic at some point. And then the other thing I want to get into as well are that depending on how many terms there are, they can be given different names: monomial, binomial, trinomial, and then beyond that it's usually just polynomial with X amount of terms. There's also a fact that can be learned here, that you can have linear monomials and binomials, but not trinomials. Once you've simplified, you cannot have a linear expression with 3 terms. For quadratics, so your highest exponent is 2, you can have 3 terms. Cubics, it'll go up to 4, and so on. So there's an interesting fact there that relates the maximum number of terms once it's in simplified form. And is it correct to say the power of the polynomial? I'm not sure, I'd have to look that up, but certainly the highest exponent on any of the unknowns. I'm going to make some assumptions. I'm going to assume that they already know the meaning of the word term and how to identify the individual terms in an expression and be able to count them. I'm going to assume that they know what we mean by a whole number, so that they already know that that includes 0 but not the negatives. If they didn't know either of those two things, which I think in a regular classroom is pretty likely, then I would just teach them first. Okay, anything else? I think collectively this little bit here largely sets out my learning intentions. So yes, I want them to know what quadratic equations are, but I also want them to know all of this. Now, communicating all of this is definitely going to take a little longer than just teaching them to identify quadratic equations alone. But it really won't take that long. And at the end, they're going to have this much more complete understanding, this complete knowledge and understanding of the whole picture, rather than just this one tiny part of it. And therefore I think much more, we still need retrieval practice, we need distributed practice, but I think easier to remember it all as well, because you're not just learning little bits here and there, a little bit as random as they come up. Instead, the whole thing has been communicated intentionally. So that's my goal. With that said, I'm going to dive into the first part of it.